Schools Division Superintendent, Dr. Edalberto L. Plinaria. Assistant Schools Division Superintendent, Dr. Rosemary Tin Masasor. SGOD Chief, Dr. Maria Carmela Tioblin. CID Chief, Dr. Maria Eva Esedon. Division Research Coordinator, Dr. Bridget Abaloyo. And to everyone, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Mapiagawi Sertano Lamon. It is an honor and a privilege to present to you my completed action research in this division research presentation entitled Teachers' Best Practices in the Delivery of Learning Modality in the New Normal. I am Indira Abdul, the school principal of Sultan Ali Dimaporo Memorial Integrated School. The COVID-19 outbreak that compelled schools to immediately change from regular face-to-face learning to alternative learning modality like modular distance learning using self-learning module or modular printer in the case of sadness threatens the quality of teaching learning process. Modular distance learning is often stigmatized as weaker options that provides an inferior quality of education. Such negative perception places a heavy challenge to educators. The series of orientation, seminars and trainings of teachers and stakeholders does not guarantee a 100% stakeholders' trust on this new learning delivery approach. Indeed, such negative perception of most parents in the SLM was justified during the parents' orientation that was conducted prior to the opening of classes school year 2020-2021. The orientation revealed during the early days of discussing modular distance learning that almost half of the participants were ambivalent of the outcome of this new learning setup. This is where teachers thought of adapting and finding best strategies and practices that fits the volatile learning environment comes in. But of course, amidst teachers' adaptation of new strategies, they must constantly keep in mind not to risk their health and safety. With DEPAD and SADMIS measures in ensuring health and safety of its employees, the research recognizes teachers' best teaching learning strategies to meet the quality standard of learning delivery in this time of pandemic. Among the best practices that the school adopted in this COVID-19 pandemic that help ease burden inherent in this new teaching learning approach that falls on access is the creation of offline-online school-level link of enrollment and offline-online school-level link on program, activities, and projects that made it possible for teachers to remain resilient and still be actively engaged at the top of the high demand of workload. Next best practices that falls on quality is the intensifying Escola sa Pandemia Bridging Gap program that motivate learners to embrace this new normal environment amidst their longing for a face-to-face class. Another best practices that still falls on quality is the practice on schools strengthening the inquiry-based learning or the IBL. The SADMIS grade 7, grade 8, and grade 9 teachers are familiar with this because the school is one of the pilot schools in the division of Lanao del Norte to adopt Dynamic Learning Program or the DLP program, wherein IBL is a mode of teaching. Teachers painstakingly oriented professional parents on the main advantage of this IBL, since parents now act as a learner's facilitator in their homeschooling setup. Still, another identified best practices on quality in this pandemic state is the observance of grade-level group chat per section, which is one best practice that is very effective in monitoring learners' academic performance regularly, and the last, identified best practices in this research that falls on governance is the strong linkages with the barangay health unit, the barangay local government unit that help monitor the health and wellness of our learners, and at the same time, the barangay local government unit personnel also serves as the school's community learning facilitator. The research questions. The study analyzes the best practices of teachers in sadness in this COVID-19 pandemic through alternative delivery mode, distance learning using self-learning module or the modular prep. Purposefully, the study explores to answers the following questions. Number 1, what are the best practices of teachers amidst pandemic in terms of letter A, access, letter B, quality, and letter C, governance? What intervention program can be proposed based on the research findings? The research design. As a phenomenological study, the main goal was to explore how sadness teachers develop best practices in this new normal. This venture documented and made a record about the teaching strategies and approaches employed by the teacher respondents. The phenomenological qualitative design is basically centered on examining the wisdom of teachers' experiences through the description provided and shared by the participants. The participants of this study are the high school and elementary teachers of Sultan Ali Dimaporo Memorial Integrated School in Esendil District. 20 teachers from the 2 departments were selected as respondents. A researcher made interview guide questions was used in gathering the data. After the participants were selectively picked, a series of scheduled interviews were conducted. Each interview session lasted for a maximum of 1 hour in the preferred time, day, and place. Prior to the conduct of the interview, the researcher had a focus group discussion, or the FGD, to all teachers in a separate venue and time. Afterwards, the group of teachers were divided into another smaller groups, which then represents the respondents of the study. Informed consent to record conversations was obtained. Confidentiality of the participants' answers were assured and the anonymity of their identities. And an unstructured mode of interview was observed to allow spontaneity and for questions to develop during the course of the interview, which are based on the interviewee's responses. Gwen in 2008 mentioned that unstructured interviews in qualitative research involves using relatively open-ended questions of research participants in order to discover their perceptions on the topic of interest. Inasmuch as gaining an intuitive understanding from SADMIS teachers' best practices is important, and that interviews were conducted. Most importantly, to develop trust, interviews were held in a location that was safe, quiet, and convenient for the participants. Thus, the interview was done at the office of the researcher. After the interview process, each of the recorded interviews was transcribed. The researcher read through the transcripts for understanding for data immersion. Then, the participants were individually met again so they could verify the interview transcripts. They were also asked to give comments and suggestions about the transcripts to make sure that the transcriptions were correct and treated with same respect. This study uses a qualitative research approach to draw out the necessary data needed from the participants. It is through unstructured interviewing methods. This was deemed necessary because the unstructured format supports the interviewing approach most commonly used in phenomenological studies. In ensuring the validity of interview questions, 10 elementary teachers and 10 high school teachers teaching English, Math, Science, Filipino at Limpang Lipunan, MAPE, and ESP were considered the target participants of the research. These teachers are the group representative of each group of teachers created during the new normal school year. There are many ethical challenges that have implications in doing qualitative study. For the same reason, the emergent and unpredictable research design. In the study involving the best practices of teachers in this trying time of COVID-19 pandemic, there are factors to be considered in terms of ethical issues because of the sensitivity of this new normal situation. Since the study will involve teachers as respondents from studies where the researcher is connected, the researcher made sure that participation is voluntary and no penalties are involved in refusal to participate. Confidentiality of the data and anonymity of respondents were maintained throughout the study. The well-being of the research respondents was top priority. Respondents was given freedom to answer the items presented. All possible measures involving safety protocols and this new normal were taken into considerations to protect the respondents from harm, potential damage during the research or after the circulation of the results. Data analysis was achieved following classes in 1978. Systematic process of analyzing textual data which calls for a validation of results by returning to study participants. The researcher opted to use these steps because it explored phenomena from the subjective experience of others who experienced the phenomenon. The steps really help to thoroughly process qualitative data. And these are the process. Number 1, read all protocol to acquire a feeling for the participants. And number 2, review each protocol and extend significant statements. Number 3, spell out the meaning of each significant statement such as formulate meanings. And number 4, organize the formulated meanings into clusters of themes. This was concluded by referring these clusters back to the original protocols to validate them and noting discrepancies among or between the various clusters, avoiding the temptation of ignoring data or themes that do not fit. Number 5, integrate results into an exhaustive description of the phenomenon under study in an equivocal or unclear statements of identification as possible. Number 7, ask participants about the findings, thus as far as the final validating step. Since qualitative phenomenological research methodology was employed in this research, the information gathered was analyzed using thematic analysis. Moreover, Creswell asserted that phenomenological data analysis proceeds through the methodology of reduction, the analysis of specific statements and themes, and a search for all possible meanings. It is worthy to note that thematic analysis is a process of condensed and reduced pieces of information into important themes which are relevant to the subject teacher's experiences. Obviously, the phenomenon under study was easily determined. Thematic analysis provides an easy and concise description of the emergent themes and patterns that lead to the phase of interpretation. Overbatchen and Sovereign in 2003 is posed that themes are patterns across sets of data that are important to the description of the phenomenon. They surface as a result of the repeating ideas which submiss teachers share. The steps in thematic analysis were followed carefully in the study and the presentation of data. The pie chart shows the number of teacher participants who practices the identified teaching strategies that extends a major impact on achieving the goals of the school, which is providing efficient and effective quality education to submiss learners amidst pandemic. Chart 1.1 discusses the answers of participants that falls on the axis. Chart number 1 reveals 4 best practices of teachers that falls on axis that emerges during the interview of the participants. Among the 20 teacher participants, 42%, that is, 8 teachers, discusses immensely during their interview the advantage and many benefits the offline-online creation of enrollment link, and another 8 teachers also favor the creation of offline-online PAPS link that had impacted their teaching learning process in this pandemic variable. The enrollment of learning during school year 2020-2021 was very uncertain during those times, and the implementation of program and activities seems to be very volatile. It was through the creation of offline, online enrollment and PAPS link that this problem were addressed successfully, and that the school was able to sustain its balance amidst pandemic because of these practices. The remaining 4 teachers reflected on their interview the home visitation and virtual meeting as one of those practices they also use in this pandemic. The researcher finds the 2 best practices the most effective. Thus, these 2 are one of the themes identified in this study as among the best practices in terms of access. Chart 1.2, which focuses on the quality side of interview guide questions, evolves on 4 best practices also, and among these 4, 3 best practices were equally favored and adopted by the teachers that gets 32% of the teachers' approval. These are intensifying bridging gap program, or popularly called by submiss teachers escuelas sa pandemia. This one best practices that addresses the challenge on learning failing marks right after the second quarter exam. Another best practice is strengthening inquiry-based learning. The teachers painstakingly conduct parents' orientation on IBL. As mentioned by the researcher earlier, IBL teaching approach had been adopted by the submiss grade 7, 8, and 9 teachers during the face-to-face class because this is the mode of teaching learning in the dynamic learning program that was adopted in submiss, and the last of these 3 best practices is the creation of group chat by grade level per section to monitor regularly learners' academic performance, and an interactive class engagement by the learners emerged from this strategy, which effectively helped solve submiss challenge on learners with failing marks at the end of the second quarter. Chart 1.3 tackles submiss teachers' best practices that falls on governance. 4 best practices also emerged during the interview of the participants. These are strong barangay health unit partnership, strong barangay local government unit linkages, strong stakeholders linkages, and intensifying feeding program. Among the 4 best practices, strong barangay health unit partnership, and strong barangay local government unit linkages are the two best practices that was chosen by the participants that has a greater impact on schools' challenge in terms of monitoring learners' nutritional status in this pandemic state. It was through the barangay health unit personnel where nutritional status, health and wellness of our learners data were collected and gathered. The barangay Bauyan health workers had helped a lot in this area. The barangay local government unit, on the other hand, helped the school in addressing the severely wasted learners of Sadness Elementary. It was through the barangay councilor workers that makes it possible for the feeding program of the school recipients reach their household, like the supply of fresh milk and the supply of Nutriban. The barangay councilor identified a day of the week where they are the one who distributes this feeding supply to the learners, since they are all familiar with the barangay Bauyan different family household. For conclusion, SADMIS teachers' experience with the new learning landscape for the school year 2020-2021 through alternative distance learning and its relationship to effective teaching learning process is quite an accomplishment for all SADMIS teachers. Considering the volatility of distance learning encompassing so many learning platforms, teachers must find a definition that fits in all situations due to the presence of varied learners' environment orientation. SADMIS teachers prove to be on the right track in terms of their adapted teaching strategies. Despite the lingering questions, are we going to survive this distance learning approach? SADMIS teachers have surpassed the birthing pains of this SLM learning. Best practices that addresses common problems and challenges were adopted by the SADMIS teachers and provided an engaging and motivating output that befitted learners, teachers, and the community. The study recommends that the school head of Sultan Ali Dimaporo Memorial Integrated School must adopt and retain these best practices into the school's curriculum by next school year if the learning setup is still on a distance learning orientation, and encourage teachers who are hesitant of these best practices to absorb it on their teaching learning strategies. In-service training on the proper utilization of these best practices be included on the school's incoming in-service training in preparation for a new school year. The different schools of Sultan Naga Dimaporo district must adopt some of these best practices since the learners within S&D are more or less similar in its community orientation. Research Proposed Interventions Program. To support the recommendation towards the absorption of the observed best practices of Sultan Ali Dimaporo Memorial Integrated School in the new school year, some interventions program might be implemented to further polish teaching learning process in this new normal that is resilient to the distance learning delivery mode. For the quality side, the proposed intervention would be number 1, implement additional or specialized form of instruction for some number of students identified to be struggling in terms of coping up with the pace of the lesson that affects their academic performance. The school will make use of the Alumni Association whose members are BSED graduates and are still awaiting for a job opportunity to come along and are living within the community where the school is located to volunteer in the school. They will be assigned to these learners with the supervision, of course, of the school's master teachers. Some of the activities that falls on the proposed interventions that will be under the supervision of the master teachers are the following. Letter A, profiling of learners according to their academic level for grade level. The top volunteer teachers will be assigned to do some enhancement of the intervention that the subject teacher or advisor had conducted if, upon assessment, learners' progress still falls on CMS level of did not meet expectations or fairly satisfactory. Letter B, profiling of identified learners that needs intense intervention according to their place of residence, either by purok or by barangay. The volunteer teachers who are coming from a particular purok or barangay will also be assigned on the place where they are residing. For the governance part, the proposed intervention would be to establish school-based management system that will address the gaps in the school's school-based management implementation and sustainability of school documents and this new normal landscape. That would be all. Keep safe, everyone, and thank you.